You can do what you like as long as it's legal. Thank you for this event. Thank you for the welcome. But I'm sick of thanks. I really am. Because what we need is a little bit more action, a little bit more less patting on the back. I'm happy we've had this opportunity to celebrate and acknowledge those courageous, passionate, driven people who came together in October 1992 to work out how we were going to implement the honour that we had bestowed on us. In fact, it was the terror that we had bestowed on us to create the New South Wales Consumer Care Advisory Group. We were people who'd been active across the sector, and we had worked independently on many, many issues to get the consumer voice heard. So this was, for many of us, a dream come true, that we would have this opportunity to work to influence policy. I sit today listening and I feel a failure. We talked this morning endlessly about how to get it right in services, how to do in-care properly, how policies affect life. Whereas from my perspective, the thing we do and the thing we need most is to live our lives where we are as well as we can with the supports we need. We don't spend much time out of a whole lifetime in care, and let me tell you, that word is very broad in meaning. And we certainly are not all involved in services or in service provision. We have a life, and we have a right to live that life full of hope and potential. For many of us, that potential was never realised. And here we are at an event to honour us and our organisation and our values, only to hear that the majority of discussion is about services and being in care and in policy. I'm all for those things, but this was about the role of the voice of lived experience being lauded and recognised for what courage it took to do that back then. So I'm in a quandary. This is a fabulous event. It's been put together well, and it can't sit right for me. It's not about the gifts and qualities that New South Wales CAG promised us. I take a moment here to quote someone that you wouldn't expect me to quote, Marilyn Monroe. And I'm saying this on behalf of all of those with lived experience in this room and those who care about us, because all we demand is our right to twinkle. And those who are twinkling here today, let your voice be heard. Let's not revert back to what we were, just pawns in a game. My peers and colleagues here today need to know that their courage, their tenaciousness and persistence have created a heritage and established a voice. They, most of them, are still advocating, stirring and being there for one another, including myself. Where did we get that tenaciousness, courage, etc.? Because we're a different generation. We came from this generation. Prior to CAG's formation, communities were concerned and had an interest in human rights. That's why we came together. We came from various experiences of loss, violation, and abuse of our rights. That's why some of us are still active. It still happens. We were there either as a patient in institutional care or in a hospital, or as an unsupported, isolated family member. We held hope for change, and that's why we do what we do. We had a hope for change for realisation of our human rights. That's what every movement starts with. People who've been part of a disenfranchised group speaking up and speaking out to have a voice to change the way society sees them. And you can name any movement you like in the last 2,000 years, and you will find underneath it all is people's clamouring to have their rights and their hopes realised. I think to a degree we've got a bit achieved. But there are many human rights, as we heard this morning, that are not being realised. And we should be brave enough to still speak out, to still hold our peers up for examination against society's values. Now, I will call us consumers because that's the word we chose way back when we first became organised. Otherwise, we were known as ex-patients. I know which one I prefer. So we had to find ways of finding and sustaining hope. So our ex-patients, as we were, struggled to be accepted as equals in groups and organisations. Very few would allow us to have an active role. Pat us on the head and send us away saying, "You're wonderful." Doesn't quite cut it. And we worked to overcome the awful isolation and overt discrimination that we experienced in life and in our organisations. We were not welcomed even amongst ourselves. Over time, we developed an identity as consumers, and for us, consumers meant we had the same rights as every other citizen. That was the importance of that name. It's been watered down and changed in time. By the time the Human Rights Inquiry into mental illness came about, we were only informally organised. And we worked under the auspice of a few organisations who supported our individual efforts. And they encouraged and prepared us to be ready to participate and contribute to the inquiry with brute honesty. This is where we came together. It was the Human Rights Inquiry into mental illness that meant we supported one another to tell the horrific tales that we told, the horrors of the misplaced mental health service system and the abuses that went on within it. The inquiry treated us as valued contributors and validated our experiences. And if you look at the history, the Human Rights Inquiry finalised in the first months of 1993, but it was already in the final draft, and the Commonwealth held it up so that they could get things in place so they didn't look stupid. So we really had a lot to gain by tying our hopes to the Human Rights Inquiry, because it forced the Commonwealth, although even till today the Commonwealth will say the National Mental Health Strategy had nothing to do with the Human Rights Inquiry. Well, I know what I believe. At the launch of the inquiry, the report, Commissioner Brian Burdekin said these words, and I think there's still a little glimpse of truth in them. The deprivation, discrimination, marginalisation and stigmatisation still suffered by the hundreds of thousands of Australians affected by mental illness is a disgrace. Where's the hope? Well, this is the hope. This is how far we've come. But the integrity of this timeline is only as good as the integrity of those who are managing policy and service provision. There are many aspects of life today that are not all that far from where we started in the good old days in 1981 when some of us first became active. So it is a wonderful pat yourself on the back timeline of great achievements and a cumulative effect of hope and purpose within the mental health and disability community, but it is not fully realised. If we could say at the end of those years that people were never going to experience abuse or neglect as part of their service, we could say that Australia was conforming to all the United Nations documents we're signatory to, then I will go home and rest on my laurels, as some of you will do too, because that's all I ever wanted. And I've never really got to that point. And I'm sick to death. I'm nearly 76. For God's sake, give us a chance to rest on our laurels. Because for some reason, we might achieve heaps of stuff, but we don't seem to be able to improve the life circumstances of the vulnerable, my peers, and that's not good enough. CAG members at the time we were formed knew that we are the change we seek. Our first logo indicates our commitment to co-design, cooperation and focusing on the things we hold in common across this state. Think about, I am the only CAG member to be on this scheduled day. That probably isn't a good look. So what happens to our co-design, cooperation and focusing on the things we hold in common? I'm just saying. We have had a battle to have the lived experience voice recognised, and it was a decade of partnerships, courage, consultation, education by consumers in those early days before we had CAG. There's a risk in the current time to minimise or trivialise these efforts and the incredible achievement that these marvellous, courageous first generations of pioneer consumer and carer activists had. And people who look at us must understand that we could be discounted, and that would be seen as the grossest of insults to the original committed people, our purpose and the establishment ethos and values of the New South Wales Consumer Advisory Group. We worked hard to create and maintain a values-based organisation. I have to skip because I'm going too far. Oh, wait, I better go back to that one. This is I think, sums up what we were thinking. We wanted to be the person that we wished we had in reaching this point for our struggles to be heard. Be the person you wish you had. And to me, that's a motivation for your future of the CAG and being and mental health carers New South Wales, because if we're not, we've failed. And all movements had that sort of philosophy. And I will skip all this stuff and I'll go back and say, may your experiences of hopefulness be personally rewarding and add value to our organisations and to our mutual human experiences. And finally, the work goes on. The cause endures. This is hope. The hope still lives, and the dreams never die. Let's hope that's what you take from this conference day. Because for me, the only time the dream will die is when I die, or else we achieve everything we ever hoped in our reforms and in our acknowledgement of the UN commitments to human rights. Thank you.